Thank you, Dave, and I appreciate you all staying way ahead of time. That's great, and I'm happy to help accommodate that myself. I also want to say thanks to the Alliance for your great work on making the More Alaska Production Act a reality. We couldn't have done it without you, and Alaskans are benefiting because of the work that you did. I mean, you heard about it this morning from one of your actually a couple of your speakers. I've seen it firsthand, as many of you have seen in your businesses, whether just recently I've just recently saw some work being done by Weona Corporation, by Little Red, by others represented in this room. And it's just an exciting time when we think about how a healthy oil industry and healthy oil opportunity for Alaskans creates so many more opportunities beyond. That's exciting. You know, over the holidays, over Christmas, we had family and friends visit us, and it's a good time to kind of decompress and to watch a movie or two. One of those movies that I enjoyed from 2012 and we watched again just a couple weeks back was that blockbuster called Lincoln. And how many of you saw that? How many of you saw that? Yeah. So if you remember the scene, and it's kind of apropos with Secretary of State Seward in it, but in his role with Alaska, but the president liked to tell his stories. And his cabinet members didn't always like to hear them. But at one point, Seward confronted President Lincoln because he had a delegation coming from Richmond towards Washington, and he was working to get the 13th Amendment passed through the House. And these seemed like mutually incompatible paths. And Lincoln listened to him as Seward was saying, you gotta pick a lane, you gotta stop this one thing and go to the other. And Lincoln's response was very sage, but he said, "Time is a great thickener of things." And then Seward, rolls his eyes back in his head and he says, "I don't even know what that means." But time is indeed a great thickener of things. The Fort Knox gold mine was originally staked in 1913, but no mining took place there for many decades. The land remained undeveloped until it was restaked in 1980. Again, nothing happened. Nothing happened until new owners purchased the property. And finally, first gold was poured in 1996. Time is a great thickener of things. The geology didn't change, but time thickened the technology, the transportation, the investment climate. It all changed, and to this day, Alaskans are benefiting from Fort Knox. In 1957, oil and gas exploration in Alaska, particularly on the Kenai, was promising, but it was challenged. Development on the Kenai Peninsula was estimated to cost 2 to 4 times that of wells developed in California. In 1959, the president of Standard Oil said, quote, "The risks likely to be encountered in Alaska oil development are not for the faint-hearted or the speculator with a shallow purse. What we see is a picture clouded by present problems and past failures, but illuminated by cautious hopes." Only 2 years later, those cautious hopes for Cook Inlet oil turned into a major refinery investment, thousands of jobs in oil and gas across decades, and cheaper energy for South Central to boot. For Cook Inlet oil and gas development, time has indeed been a great thickener of things. And so it is with North Slope gas, a dream of Alaskans since 1968, when the announcement of Prudhoe Bay oil included an estimated 26 trillion cubic feet of gas. As Alaskans, we own our gas and lease rights to our gas. And consequently, every Alaska gas line effort has dealt not only with the economics of gas, but with that tension, with the challenge of merging private and public resource ownership interests. In the 1990s, Governor Knowles' administration privately negotiated a North Star royalty reduction. The administration presented the royalty contract for legislative approval in what we saw at the time as legislators as a take-it-or-leave-it deal. The legislature reacted strongly and negatively. Lawmakers of the late 90s were concerned, after North Star, that an administration might negotiate all the commercial terms of a gas line deal without legislative input or public scrutiny. On the other hand, legislators agreed with the Knowles administration assertion that it was not in the state's interest to have companies negotiate with 60 individual legislators. Legislators, however, also wanted a real shot at protecting Alaskans' interests. The legislature codified these interests in the original Stranded Gas Development Act that Governor Knowles signed into law. And the Stranded Gas Act gave the administration authority to negotiate terms of a gas line, but with some sideboards. They said, you as an administration, you can go negotiate these terms. We're going to tell you what a qualified project looks like, what qualified parties are, who they are, and then we're going to ask you to go negotiate and come back to us for approval. Under the terms of the Stranded Gas Act, Governor Murkowski's administration negotiated fiscal terms with producers between 2003 and 2005. But when Governor Murkowski sought legislative approval, lawmakers rejected the contract. Neither legislators nor the public trusted the lengthy private negotiation process, nor the contract terms produced in that. As the Stranded Gas Act was a predictable progression from the tussle over North Star, so in 2007, passage of Governor Palin's AGIA legislation was a logical progression from the Stranded Gas Act experience of the time. Back then, Alaskans' trust in state government had vaporized. Gas line negotiations had gone badly, and public trust over that and other issues was at an all-time low when it came to our state government. On the gas line, Alaskans, legislators, the administration, all of us, most of us in this room in 2007, were locked into a narrative or a mindset, a way of doing things that assumed that in order to get a gas line, we had to negotiate all the terms for a gas line up front at once. So within that assumption, Governor Palin and legislators sought to restore public trust and protect the public interest by enshrining a set of must-haves in statute for Alaskans in exchange for state participation in a gas line project. And time once again became a thickener of things. When AGIA passed, no parties were working cooperatively forward toward a gas line, and AGIA changed that. TransCanada was selected by the state as an AGIA licensee. Exxon joined TransCanada, and the two began working cooperatively with the state. BP and ConocoPhillips joined together in a competing project known as Denali. Again, AGIA's original focus was to induce construction of a gas line through Alaska and Canada to the lower 48. The producers, the AGIA licensee, Alaska state government, everyone was focused on a pipe to the lower 48. That's because most thought the U.S. was facing a sharp decline in domestic gas production. But the same year AGIA was passed, something unique was shifting the market. Gas volumes in the lower 48 were increasing dramatically, and shale gas transformed the U.S. markets as well as impacted global markets. Now, some claim today that they always knew an overland pipe to the lower 48 would never work, but I'd say to them that not even major companies like BP and ConocoPhillips were willing to publicly admit that until 2011, when they shuttered the Denali project. Indeed, as late as September 2011, Senator Mark Begich sent a letter to my office urging that I create a state loan guarantee to back a pipeline through Canada to the lower 48. By then, however, it was clear that Alaska gas was unlikely to flow overland to the lower 48, at least in the near term, because of the growing volume of shale gas. At the same time, the Pacific Rim market demand was strengthening. And so I set Alaska on a different course. I challenged North Slope producers and TransCanada to get behind one project, an all-Alaska LNG project to supply gas to Alaskans and to be marketed as LNG to worldwide markets, to global markets. I set a steady, logical plan to get us there using lessons learned firsthand through the history that I've just described. First, we needed gas. We need gas from both Prudhoe and Point Thompson to anchor any large-diameter gas line. Point Thompson, with trillions of cubic feet of gas and lots of liquids, we needed that gas. Well, we were in litigation over that gas when I became governor. No development had occurred there in more than 40 years. The state's land had been under lease, yet little work had been completed east of Prudhoe Bay. And we fought for Alaskans' interests all the way through the Alaska Supreme Court when it came to Point Thompson. And thanks to the hard work of many people, many people, including then Natural Resources Commissioner Dan Sullivan, ExxonMobil's Rich Kruger, BP Alaska's former head John Minjay, ConocoPhillips Alaska's Trond Eric Johansson. Thanks to their leadership and the teams working these issues, we resolved the litigation and put lots of Alaskans, many of you and your companies, to work. And today, more than 1,000 people have jobs because of this Point Thompson resolution. You heard earlier from Gina Dickerson of Exxon the magnitude of the investment that's going into Point Thompson, $1.8 billion. So far, 70% of it having been spent in Alaska, looking at about $4 billion worth of investment there. That was unlocked with that Point Thompson resolution. At Point Thompson, we built trust and reward through incremental, verifiable performance, those work commitments. We brought a related principle into gas line discussions with the producers in TransCanada, and that's the principle of commensurate, proportionate commitments. In other words, you take a step, we take a step. You make a commitment, we make a commitment. Along the way, we each verify our commitments and progress. When it comes to the gas line, the state will verify progress and make new commitments through the legislative process at multiple points, and the companies via their boardroom decisions at multiple points. So with Point Thompson Gas now in the gas line equation, we next needed a project concept selected. It's in the state's interest to negotiate commercial terms with a single project, not individual partners. If the state gets caught up trying to satisfy individual partners, rather than negotiating with one project entity, the state loses more value in that deal. The state has but one geographic resource base from which to maximize value for Alaskans. The companies across the table have global resources from which to work around issues arising between them. Accordingly, we want to deal with a project's unified position, which they can arrive at using their many resources. The state does not want to get tangled up in individual company concerns, project concerns. To get a project in 2012, I called on the producers in TransCanada to harden their numbers and to identify a pipeline project and work schedule. And they met that benchmark. This last fall, even the companies picked Nikiski as the termination point for this gas line. Then yesterday, the Alaska Gas Line Development Corporation's board of directors voted to create a subsidiary with the intent to participate in the Alaska LNG project with the producers, TransCanada, and Alaska's Departments of Natural Resources and Revenue. For the first time in Alaska's history, all the necessary parties have aligned to make an Alaska gas line project go. 3 producers, a preeminent pipeline builder, AGDC, an entity that can carry whatever state interest is required of it, and state agencies responsible for the people's royalty and tax interests. With gas, a project, and alignment of parties, the next question is, what role should the state play? How can we best own our destiny and maximize our gas resources for the people? Well, because an LNG project is much more complex and expensive than a traditional natural gas overland pipe, we hired some of the world's most qualified experts to analyze our cost and royalty and tax structures. We asked them to look for ways we could be competitive in world markets, and we've analyzed ways to do this without necessarily reducing state royalties or taxes. I think Alaska can best control her own destiny if we become a partner and participate in an Alaska LNG project. And here's why. Ownership or participation allows the state to receive a share of the profits over the entirety of the project. When companies build LNG projects, they often take profits at all points in the value chain. Gas processors take profit, pipelines take profit, liquefaction owners take profit, and ship owners take profit. And without ownership or participation, the state would, in essence, pay for others' profits that reduce the state's revenue from royalties and taxes. With Alaska as a partner, Alaskans stand to gain more. Ownership ensures we either pay ourselves for project services or, at the very least, understand, negotiate, and ensure the lowest possible costs. This structure is also attractive to the North Slope producers. From their perspective, their capital costs are reduced by an amount proportional to the percentage of state take from royalty and taxes. Think of it like a hunting trip, where the costs are borne between the participants. 3 guys go out hunting and the costs are prorated between them. Add a 4th, the costs per person go down. And in my hunting party, rewards are shared. State participation can make Alaska gas more competitively priced in world markets in the next decade while retaining our state tax and royalty revenues. So let's take stock of where we are. We have the gas, both from Prudhoe and Point Thompson. We have an all-Alaska LNG project selected from the North Slope to Nikiski. We have all the right parties aligned and working together. To pursue this path, however, requires a transition from AGEA to a new structure. It's another natural progression where time has been not only a thickener of things, but a great teacher. AGEA was designed for a sole developer of a singular pipeline project moving natural gas. The complexity and scope of the Alaska LNG project is different, with a gas treatment plant, pipeline, liquefaction. A broad consortium of owners is required to work together there. And while AGEA may not have induced actual construction of a gas line, that statutory framework played a substantial role in inducing alignment for an LNG project. Our way forward will be on Alaska's terms and in Alaskans' interests. Now, AGEA contained timeless principles and benefits for Alaska, and we will retain those. Gas for Alaskans, for instance, on reasonable tariff terms. Exploration of Alaska's gas acreage, gas expansion potential, local hire, to name a few. The way we get there is by working with a party or parties who will meet Alaska's terms. We have agreed to amicably terminate our involvement with TransCanada under AGEA, but sign up with TransCanada in a more traditional commercial arrangement, along with the producers and AGDC. The reasons for signing up under a traditional commercial agreement with TransCanada start with TransCanada's willingness to meet Alaska on Alaska's terms. First, TransCanada agreed to a debt equity structure that guarantees Alaska's interests are protected. Second, TransCanada is the preeminent pipeline builder operator in North America. Third, they know this project well, having worked on it for years. Fourth, AGDC and the producers are willing to move forward as a group with TransCanada to commercialize Alaska's gas. And fifth, TransCanada's participation reduces the state's cash commitment and increases the state's return. We plan to seek legislative approval for the state entities to align with TransCanada and the producers in a more traditional commercial arrangement. Very soon, I expect a commercial agreement with a transparent set of terms and roadmap for Alaskans to consider. That commercial agreement is known as a heads-of agreement for the Alaska LNG project. I expect that document to be signed shortly by Exxon, BP, ConocoPhillips, TransCanada, the AGDC, by our commissioners of the Departments of Revenue and Natural Resources. The heads-of agreement will be subject to public review by the legislature this session. Additionally, I will ask legislators to take up legislation addressing how the state will manage its gas resource. Our proposed legislation would authorize DNR to modify certain leases and allow the state to enter into shipping agreements to move and sell Alaska's gas. The legislation will also ask lawmakers to switch from a variable net tax to a flat gross tax for North Slope gas. It would allow certain leases to pay production taxes with gas and enable the Departments of Revenue and Natural Resources to work together to manage the state's gas revenues. The bottom line, we will have an investment quality project when that's complete. Finally, this session, I will ask the legislature to review changes made to AGDC and House Bill 4 and support revisions needed to carry the state's interest in a project. For example, AGDC could also be authorized to carry an interest in liquefaction. And to summarize what I expect in the next 4 months, public review of project guidance documents, including a signed heads-of agreement for the Alaska LNG project, and passage of authorizing legislation. With a heads-of agreement and legislation passed, the parties will formally proceed into what's called pre-FEED, that pre-front-end engineering and design phase of the project. Pre-FEED further refines the cost and engineering challenges the project faces, challenges that must be addressed before the parties commit the billions of dollars necessary to complete the project. Over the course of about 18 months of pre-FEED, the parties will finish field work, begin detailed design, make their regulatory filings, and test those world markets. Unlike previous efforts to commercialize North Slope gas, the public and the legislature will have the basic ingredients of a deal in front of them as they consider legislation moving the project forward. The guidance documents we will submit to legislators form the basic agreements that will keep the project moving forward and provide guidance to the deeply technical and complicated negotiations to follow. The guidance documents set out general agreement on essential issues dealing with factors such as state ownership, project costs, project expansion policy, workforce development, in-state hire, and the marketing of gas. They define the states and other parties' interests in broad terms and commit the parties to negotiate the details in good faith, details that will ultimately be addressed in contracts that come back to the legislature for approval. You guys should be really happy at this point. This is huge progress. So. Pardon me if I didn't make that clear. But I'm also aware that over the decades, we've seen efforts to develop a large gas project falter for various reasons. That's why we'll maintain our backup plan to get Alaskans gas to Alaskans. The legislature wisely addressed this in creating AGDC. AGDC is uniquely positioned to be our ace in the hole. We can still get gas to Alaskans first via AGDC's smaller volume ASAP project if work falters on the Alaska LNG project. AGDC will remain on track for an open season for early 2015. So the good news today, we have a gas line project in sight. We have parties aligned who can move a project forward. We have protected Alaskans' interests through commensurate, proportionate steps that can be publicly scrutinized and will be publicly scrutinized over time. And we have a backup plan to build a gas line that's proceeding to open season. So I think Alaska's foundation is strong, and I know our future is bright. And we're moving forward on the promise of Alaska's natural gas, and I'm glad that you all, your families, and your companies are here to make sure that happens. God bless you, and thank you.